Happy Monday or Tuesday. It's Mrs. Coolman here. Today we're going to go through 7.2, which is over multiplying polynomials. So last week we spent the time adding and subtracting, so now we're going to move into multiplication. You're going to see that a lot of what we're doing is very similar to things that we've done before, but now we're just going to apply it and take it a few steps further. So to start off, we will be on page 209 in your student journal. And so we're going to start off by just some basic things that you need to know in regards to multiplying polynomials. And we're going to start off by using those algebra tiles that we started with last section. So remember, the tiny squares, whether it has a plus or a minus, represents 1. So that means positive 1 times positive 1, which we know gives us positive 1. Two positives gives us a positive. Well, now we know the rule of 1 positive times a negative gives us a negative 1. And a negative times a negative gives us a positive. So if it's the same, it's positive. If they're different, it's negative. So now we're moving on to expanding our algebra tiles into variables. So remember, the long skinny rectangles represent x. So you're taking x times a positive 1 just gives us x. So whenever you take a variable times a number, it's going to be that number with the variable. So this is technically 1x, but we don't have to write that 1. Now we take our x times a negative 1. I'm sure you guessed it, we get a negative 1x, or just negative x. The next one, we have negative x times a positive 1, we're still going to get a negative 1x, or just negative x. So you'll see on letters E and F, we get the same thing, but we were multiplying with two different things. Because we are simply just worried about positive versus negative, and it's times 1, we get the same answer. Next, we have a negative x times a negative 1. Well, we already know two negatives make a positive, so we're going to get a positive 1, and then we still have our x, so we just get a positive x. Now we're moving on when we start multiplying variables together. So this is taking x times x. And if you remember from our exponent rules, this is x to the first power times x to the first power, which is the same thing as x to the 1 plus 1, which gives us x squared. Well, on the next one, the only difference is we have a positive times a negative. So we're still going to get the x squared, but now we just have to remember our rules from a negative times a positive, which gives us a negative x squared. And lastly, we have a negative x times a negative x. We know two negatives make a positive, and so we still get our x squared, and it's a positive x squared. So again, the same rule applies. If you have the same positive or negative, then it gives you a positive. So two negatives give you a positive, two positives give you a positive. But when you have one of each, that's where we get our negative answer. Moving on to page 210. So now this is where we're actually going to start multiplying things together. So you're going to see we have x plus 3. So this is our x plus 3. And then we have our x minus 2. So the way that they have it written out is one method of doing this. There's so many different ways to multiply binomials together in order to get your answer. This is just one of them. So when you take your x times your x, that's when you get your x squared. Well, if you take your 3 times your x, that's where you get a positive 3x. That's what this is right here. Next, when you take your x times a negative 2, that's when you get a negative 2x. That's what that represents. And then lastly, if you take a 3 times a negative 2, you get negative 6. So from here is where we actually start combining things. So we have an x squared, we have a negative 2x, we have a positive 3x, and we have a negative 6. Right away, nothing combines with this one or this one. So we know that's a part of our answer. We know we're going to have an x squared and a negative 6. So we just have to worry about this part here. So that's the same thing as saying I have 3 turtles, 2 of my turtles swam away, so I'm left with 1 turtle, or 1x. It's how we get our answer to be x squared plus x minus 6. So if you're someone that using the algebra tiles made it a little bit more confusing, that's okay. I'm going to show another way on B. The algebra tiles method is still there for you if you need it, and you can refer back to it, but I'm going to show a different way. So on letter B, I'm going to use the rainbow method, is what I call it, because it's like you're drawing rainbows. You're using the distributive property. So we have to start off by sharing this 2x with everything in the second parentheses. So that means I have to take my 2x times 2x. So that's the same thing as taking 2 times 2, which gives me 4, and then my x times x gives me x squared. Next, I have to take my 2x times 1, which gives me a positive 2x. Next, I take my negative 1 times a 2x. So that's going to give me a negative 2x. And then a negative 1 times a positive 1 gives me a negative 1. So now from here is where I can actually start combining things and simplifying. Well, these are the 2 terms that can go together. I have 2 apples, I ate 2 apples. Now I have no apples. So that goes away. And I would be left with 4x squared minus 1. And you can see from the algebra tiles, we'd get the same thing. So here's 4x squared right there. Well, these 2 rectangles cancel these ones, and I'm left with a negative 1. I still get the same thing. So I want you guys to try letters C and D on your own. You can choose to use either method, or it doesn't matter at the end of the day which method you choose, as long as you work through them. So if you're just joining back, you will see my two answers I have on the first one. I get 2x squared plus 3x minus 2. And I used the boxes below to help my answer. And then on D, I got negative x squared plus x plus 6. And I used the distributive method, or using the rainbows. At the end of the day, it does not matter how you get there. And there's even another method that we will show you when we go through the extra practice with Mr. Patinsky. So be on the lookout for that method. So there you have it. That's all the basics that you need to know for multiplying polynomials together. And be on the lookout for the extra practice from Mr. Patinsky. And have a wonderful rest of your day.